It's 2022 and we're still using batting average, home runs, and RBI as a primary way to evaluate an offensive player. It's really just insane. It's a holdover from the past, and we're going to talk about why that is and what we can use that better captures a player's value next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And this has been a long time coming. I have wanted to do a show like this for a while, and really it's going to take more than one episode to get through everything I want to say here, but this is square one. I want to talk about the problem with batting average, home runs, and RBI as the primary way to evaluate an offensive player. I think a lot of you who listen to my show, I never talk about those when I'm talking about, oh, this is how this player has performed this year. Never, ever do I say this is their average home runs, RBI. But maybe some of you still or want to know why that is and still use those, and that's okay. It's the thing is that it's pushed as the primary, if you watch a television broadcast, this is what they're showing you first and foremost. So let me just jump right into it. The problem with batting average is twofold. Number one, it is not weighing the different offensive outcomes. You've got your singles, your doubles, your triples, and your homers. Batting average is simply telling you it's basically like hit percentage. What percent of your at-bats, which is another problem, it's counting at-bats and not plate appearances because it doesn't care about walks as if they don't even matter. But the first problem I want to focus on is it's not applying any weight to the difference between a home run and a single. So if you hit a home run or you hit a single, it doesn't matter. It's a hit, and that's how it affects your batting average. So you could be 5 for 5 with 5 homers and your batting average is 1,000. 5 for 5 with 5 singles and your batting average is 1,000, as if they're equivalent. But they're very much not equivalent because those two things have a dramatically different effect on run creation, essentially. And so, of course, in my 5 at-bat sample, it's easy to see that. But if we're talking hundreds of plate appearances, you've got a mixture of all kinds of different outcomes, your singles, doubles, triples, and homers, this is where it creates a problem. And so we're going to talk about, oh, this guy's a 300 hitter. Great, but 90% of his hits are singles. Would you rather have that guy or the guy who hits 250, but 20% of his hits are singles and the rest are extra base hits? We have to think about the different weights of the offensive outcomes. And that's honestly what slugging percentage attempts to do, but it has its own problems. And the problem this is what slugging percentage does, let me just say. It counts a single as a 1, a double as a 2, a triple as a 3, and a home run as a 4. And it applies those weights to the different offensive outcomes. The problem with that is that that's not correct. A home run is not actually 4 times as valuable as a single. A double is not 2 times as valuable as a single, etc. So we actually do have a good sense of what the different values are of the different offensive outcomes. And that's where when you hear things with weighted in the name, weighted on base average, WOBA, weighted runs created plus, it is weighting the different offensive outcomes. It is properly weighting a single versus a double, triple, homer, and walk. And so getting back to batting average, it's not doing that at all. And then the other problem, of course, is that it's not counting walks. And so also when we talk about home runs, a lot of people maybe when I gave that example, 5 for 5, 5 singles, 5 for 5, 5 homers, you're thinking, yeah, well, I look at home runs. But again, that's not counting triples or doubles in the equation at all. But the example I was giving on Twitter, and this is where I was inspired for this show today, was in basketball, field goal percentage, right? They're smart enough in basketball these days. They don't just show you straight up field goal percentage because they understand it matters whether you're taking 3-point shots or 2-point shots. So mostly I think in basketball, I don't watch nearly as much basketball as I do baseball, but they'll show you 2-point field goal percentage, 3-point field goal percentage. But if you're just showing me the overall field goal percentage, it's seriously flawed because I need to know how many of those shots were 3-point shots because those count by a point more than the 2-point shot. Well, guess what? Batting average is significantly worse than this because it's as if there's a 1-point shot, a 2-point shot, a 3-point shot, and a 4-point shot, and a separate kind of 1-point shot, which is also known as a walk, right? And so it's not the perfect analogy because of what I just said. The weights are not actually 1, 2, 3, and 4 for single, double, triple, and homer. And in basketball, they are because it's just a straight up point total. But batting average is like if we had those 4 shots plus the walk, which is like a secondary type of 1-point shot. And then we're just straight up showing field goal percentage, not caring at all about what type of shots you're making. So when we're showing average and then counting home runs, it's like saying this guy has a 40% field goal percentage and he has 25 4-point shots made. Okay, it's like it's not wrong. It's a correct information, but it's just there's such a better way of doing this. We can weight the different outcomes and create like an average out of that. And that's what weighted on base average does, and it scales itself to the league average on base percentage. And so if we could just kind of pick one metric, I think weighted on base average would probably be it if we're just going to show one thing, except it's not the simplest thing to understand. And so I want to talk in a minute about something like OPS, which is just combining on base percentage and slugging and why that's a much better step in the right direction. And then we're also going to talk about when we look at things that have a plus after them, like OPS plus, and why that's even better, and how it's such an improvement and it's so simple that maybe if we're going to use one thing, that should be what we use. And we'll also talk about how slugging percentage is flawed and the fix there. So all of that in just a minute. But first, it's that time of year. I've pretty much given up on all of my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Puffs yet? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Go to Built.com, scroll down to their macros chart, and you will be blown away. High protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, as promised, I want to dive a little bit deeper into this. Hopefully I've done a decent job of explaining the problem with batting average. I mean, my goodness, batting average is such a crazy, flawed way to evaluate a hitter. It's, again, like that hit percentage with 4 different types of shots in basketball. Or like saying field goal percentage and not caring. This guy makes a ton of 4-point shots, but his field goal percentage is a little lower, versus the guy who makes a ton of 1-point shots with a higher field goal percentage. You have to consider the type of shot that they're taking. Anyway, thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast. Recaps of MLB games with analysis from our local experts, taking fans through the season like no other network can. Free and available wherever you get podcasts. So yeah, after every game, every Locked On host, we give a little key takeaway, short, like 1 minute, not just summary of the game, but summary of like the importance and emotion and the key takeaway from that game. And you can listen to every team's key takeaway every day on the Locked On Now podcast. So check it out. Anyway, So I hope I've made clear the flaws with batting average, and yet we continue to use it. And I think it is a little bit too much to just expect people to, suddenly we're going to put WOBA on the screen and expect people to understand what that means. I think we've moved towards most people understand OPS. So let's talk about OPS for a minute. So OPS, literally, the O stands for on base percentage. The P stands for plus, and the S stands for slugging percentage. So it is really a simple thing. And, I think we're all at this point familiar with on base percentage and slugging percentage. But again, I want to talk about the flaws with those, but why OPS combined is just a much better way of looking at a hitter versus batting average. So on base percentage is flawed in the same way that batting average is flawed. The one key difference is that it accounts for walks, which you absolutely must account for. A walk is not quite as valuable as a single, and I think that makes logical sense. Most people will understand why. Because when you walk, you're not possibly advancing runners more than one base. A single often scores a guy from second base. It can move a guy from first to third, etc. Whereas a walk may not even move anybody up. But if it forces anybody to advance, then it does. But it's slightly less valuable than a single, but it still counts. We can't just ignore the walk. And so we can basically, in my opinion, just get rid of batting average. I know it's like so ingrained, but think about when these stats like came to their popularity and status that they hold today. Batting average, these people, whoever made it up or like decided it was so important, this is like over 100 years ago. And we just are so much smarter today. We can please just move past this. Please just think of that basketball analogy. That batting average is worse than that. And that's what we continue to use. It really is just insane. And the only reason we do it, like if we had to start from scratch and come up with one number, we're going to make the primary way to evaluate a hitter, it would be insane to come up with batting average and say, that's it. We've done it. We've come up with the best way to evaluate a baseball hitter. Not even close. It is one of the worst overall ways to do it. And yet here we are in 2022, still largely doing that. So OPS is such a better way because what it does is it says, okay, this is the rate at which you get on base. It also doesn't make sense to me, by the way, with things like average and on base percentage and even slugging percentage, we show it as a decimal, right? Like 0.300 is 300. That just means 30%. It's basically hit percentage. What percentage of your at-bats, not counting walks, are hits? And 300 average is a 30%. So it's like field goal percentage in basketball, 30%. And on base percentage, which we call percentage, we also show it as a decimal. So the league average on base percentage this year right now is like 312. So it's like 31.2% of plate appearances end with the guy getting on base. And so another thing I want to say, we often say if baseball is a game of failure, you can fail 7 out of 10 times and you're a great hitter. Well, you're again not counting walks. And so the league average on base percentage is always typically these days around 320. And so really 32% of the time, the league average hitter gets on base in one way, shape, or form, including home runs, right? Home runs count as getting on base, even though you don't actually ever you don't stay on any of the bases. You get to round them and come home. But regardless, that's what on-base percentage is telling you. It's a big improvement from batting average simply because it just adds in walks. So now slugging percentage, as I said, it's good because we're getting closer, right? We're saying this is how often you get on base. And then slugging percentage is attempting to tell us when you get your hits, what type of hit are you getting? The only problem with slugging percentage is that it's weighing them wrong. We know, based on looking at historical information, like context neutral. That's something that a lot of these metrics attempt to do, and that's the flaw with like RBI, is that it's context dependent. If you come up all season long with nobody on base every time you come up, you're not going to get a lot of RBI. The only ones you're going to have are home runs, right? Because you're driving yourself in because there's nobody on base. But if you come up with the bases loaded every time, you're going to get a ton of RBI. So it is very up to chance in some ways, and it depends on your teammates. Like if you're on a good team and you hit in the middle of the lineup, in theory, you're going to have way more RBI opportunities. And so that's why basically we just throw that one out and like I get it. It doesn't, sometimes there are players who are more capable in certain situations of driving in guys. But, let me just say, we talk about, his numbers with runners in scoring position. Well, those are not stable. And you can see a team that thrives in that one year, and then it's pretty much the same team. They bring them back and they are terrible the next year. So it's kind of just random. And that's why we try to make, when we're doing kind of advanced baseball analysis, we try to make it context neutral. So it's not dependent on factors like what are your teammates doing when you're evaluating me. So slugging percentage, again, we know the different weights of the offensive outcomes. Like a home run is worth, I forget exactly, 2.4 times a single, something like that, but it's not 4 times a single. But it's much better than not counting it at all, okay? And so slugging percentage is decent, just like on-base percentage is decent. But I do want to mention something called isolated power, which is when we take slugging percentage and we subtract batting average. So the example I always give here is like you can have a 500 slugging percentage for player A and a 500 slugging percentage for player B, and yet their actual kind of slug and extra base prowess is totally different. And the example is if you have a 500 batting average, but they're all singles, you have a 500 slugging percentage because, again, it's weighting the single as a ×1 multiplier. So 5 hits out of 10, but they're all singles, is a 500 slugging percentage. Versus if you're 1 for 10 with a home run, you have a 400 slugging percentage. Or 2 for 10 with 2 home runs, you have an 800 slugging percentage. So 1 for 5, I can't work out the math there exactly, but it's just how a lot of singles can kind of give a false indicator of slugging. So we see this sometimes. We see that a certain player against like left-handed pitching in one short kind of season had a 600 slugging percentage, but they had like a 400 batting average against lefties. So that the power there is actually when you take the slugging and you subtract the singles out of it. And that's why you subtract batting average, which is kind of effectively making everything a single. And so when we subtract the two, we get to isolated power. So in the example of the 500 hitter with a 500 slugging, he has a 500 slugging, but the isolated power is actually 0. And that's indicating no extra base hit prowess, right? So that makes logical sense. And the league average there is around 170. So that's a better way than just straight up looking at slugging percentage, in my opinion, to evaluate extra base kind of power. And so, yeah, coming up next, we're going to combine the two and talk about OPS, and then we're going to talk about the plus, right? And how, to me, if we're going to go with one number that is simple and people understand today, why not just go with this? There is more to it. There are better numbers, in my opinion, but we'll talk about why this one should really hit home and we should make a push to please at least kind of move in this direction. And one major media source is already doing this. BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports betting stats and info. Find all the latest sports development, league news, and reviews, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. One of the things I've been looking at BetOnline is the Cy Young odds. And at least entering the season, and Carlos Rodon and Logan Webb were kind of viewed as long shots in the National League to win the Cy Young Award. But, I mean, Carlos Rodon, he's going to start again tonight against the Guardians in Cleveland. And if he keeps going out there and shoving like he did in his first start, he may put himself into front runner status. Like, that's how dominant he was. And if he can do anything like that over any kind of sustained period, he may be at the top there. So head over to Bet Online today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet Online, it's where the game starts. All right, as promised, I want to just talk about combining on base percentage and slugging and then adding the plus. What does that mean when we talk about something like OPS plus? So combining on base plus slugging is kind of funny. You're just like smashing together two numbers that don't necessarily belong together. Like you can't just do that and say, okay, we're done. Like that's like a precise measure of a player's talent. You can't do that. It's like adding average and slug. You just can't do it. But we do it, and it's okay because they are two numbers that are improvements over batting average, and each alone doesn't tell us enough. And so when you combine them, that's okay with me. It might be nice to combine on base percentage and isolated power. I haven't thought about that, but OPS is okay. It's such a giant leap forward from batting average that I'm okay if we focus on that. It would be like I would take the progress that comes from everybody just looking at OPS instead of batting average. Just let's push batting average aside and embrace OPS, and I'm all right with that. So what we do when we add this plus is very simple. We're just making the league average equal to 100. So anything that has a plus at the end of it is doing this. And when you have an OPS plus of 100, that means that your OPS number, whatever it is, like 720, is equal to league average. And then you might have someone who's at 130, and that simply means their OPS is 30 percentage points above league average. And so you can do this with anything. You can have like a batting average plus. And so it will tell you, like if you have right now, the league average batting average, by the way, is like 233 or something like that. So if you have a 233 batting average, your batting average plus is 100. So it really is that simple. And I think the reason I'm pushing for OPS at this point is because we've seen it enough. People are familiar enough with it. By the way, the triple slash line, when we look at, you see like batting average, on base, and slugging. I just want to make that clear. Some people probably see this and don't know what it is. You've got the three numbers with the slashes, the three decimals with slashes separating them. That's batting average, on base, and slugging. And so we're saying forget the first number. It's fine. To me, to show the slash line is great. But what OPS is you're simply combining the last two numbers. And then, again, league average is an OPS plus of 100. So there are better ways. I think that weighted runs created plus is actually an improvement over OPS plus. And the thing is, what it is doing is correcting the issue that I'm talking about, which is that there's a flaw with on base percentage and there's a flaw with slugging percentage. So these numbers end up being pretty similar, but to me, weighted runs created plus is a better way to evaluate an offensive player. And it's become more and more prevalent. I think we see it more and more, but the idea is the same. Like you don't really need to understand the gory details behind the weighted runs created plus number. The idea is the same, but just know what it's doing is simply like think about the name weighted. So that means they're weighting the different outcomes. They're giving proper weight to a single versus a double versus a walk versus a triple versus a homer. And then runs created. So actually, when we look at like this guy has a 120 weighted runs created plus, it means their weighted runs created is 20 percentage points above league average. And what that means is they're creating 20 percentage points more runs than a player with the same number of plate appearances. And so it doesn't really get much better than that. And that's why we use that number. And what thrills me is that more and more we are seeing this, right? We see it in print media all the time, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily know what it is. I've had people ask me about this and ask me to do an episode just like this where I'm explaining it. So it's hard to necessarily explain. Like if you look at Fangraphs glossary of weighted runs created plus, it is kind of dense. The other thing about the plus, by the way, is that it's accounting for park factors. I don't know if that's true necessarily of OPS plus, but in weighted runs created plus, they're also making an adjustment based on the ballpark you play in. So if you put up a 340 weighted on base average in, as a player for the Rockies, that's not as impressive as a player who puts up a 340 weighted on base average playing for the Giants because of the ballpark differences of their home park. And so weighted runs created plus is making that adjustment. So a 340 weighted on base average for a Rockies player might have a weighted runs created plus of 100. So it's actually league average offense, even though it's an above average weighted on base average. It is average offense, because if you put an average offensive player in Colorado, they're going to have above average kind of surface level numbers. But if you have a 340 weighted on base average, the identical one to the Rockies player, and you're a Giants player, you might have a 120 weighted runs created plus. And because it's making that ballpark adjustment. So that's just another reason why these numbers are more valuable. And batting average is totally affected, by the way, by playing, depending on where you play. So I think every year we see people say, oh, the Rockies, man, they have a great offense. No, they don't. They haven't. They've had one of the worst. If you put a bad team in Colorado, they're going to put up numbers that look semi-impressive. But if you put that same team and put them in a Giants uniform, their numbers, kind of surface level numbers, average on-base slugging even, are going to take a massive hit. And so we have to do that. That is an important part of all this, is making the proper adjustments based on ballpark. So anyway, weighted runs created plus does all of that. Again, 100 is average. OPS plus and weighted runs created plus are often going to look pretty similar. So it's okay if you want to pick one, if you're more comfortable with OPS plus because you understand what on base means, you understand what slugging means, that's fine. It's just such a step forward from batting average, home runs, RBI, that's completely okay to me. So that's all the time we have for today. I hope that I made that as clear as possible. Let me know if you're on YouTube or whatever in the comments what you'd like me to break down next. I want to make this a more regular thing. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully, brings you his unique perspective on the major leagues past and present. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. So coming up on Monday, we're going to break down this series with the Giants in Cleveland facing this Guardians team that has gotten off to a good start. I've seen some people say, oh, they have a great offense. Well, not really. They just have had a great little start here. But I would expect that some of the Guardians offense is going to cool down in this series against the Giants. So, the Guardians project to be a slightly below 500 team, and hopefully the Giants can make them look that way. So we'll be back on Monday breaking it all down. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like the show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thank you in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again on Monday. Have a great weekend. Thanks again for listening. Stay locked on Giants.